Hey there, guys! Sejam todos muitíssimo bem-vindos. Titi está aqui, feliz da vida, para gravar um episódio novo de PodTia, onde a convidada especial serei eu mesma. I'm my first very special guest. E esse podcast vai ser um podcast 100% in English. Eu coloquei um poll lá no meu Instagram perguntando se vocês queriam um episódio em inglês, onde a tia falasse inglês o tempo inteiro, para que vocês pudessem praticar o listening skills de vocês. Então, aí está. E o assunto de hoje vai ser bilingualism. E como eu fiz para criar dois meninos fluentes em inglês, né, bilíngues, e quais foram as técnicas, enfim, vocês vão conhecer toda essa história, mas antes de mais nada, você que está ali no YouTube, não se esquece, já se inscreve no canal, já dá o joinha, faz todas aquelas coisas que tu sabe que tu tem que fazer, né? E para você que está aí no Spotify, já segue o canal da tia, porque lembra que toda terça-feira tem episódios novos aqui do PodTia e todos os dias tem uma expressão nova. A Titia tá sempre explicando novas expressões aí para você deixar o seu vocabulário lindo e rico in English. So let's get started. Let me tell you the story of how I raised both my kids to be bilingual. Well, first of all, as you know, I'm an English teacher daughter, so my mom's not actually Brazilian. She's from Chile. That means I was born and raised bilingual, not because I was born in Chile, but because my mother used to speak Spanish sometimes. But I remember that I didn't know the difference between two languages. I didn't know that she was speaking either Spanish or Portuguese. It was not something I was aware of. I was not conscious of it. But every vacation, I mean, not every, but when I was very little, I mean, when I was maybe from 2 to 7 years old, my mom used to take us to Chile. It was very difficult. She was a very tough woman because, you know, that time we had that super inflation going on in Brazil. So it was difficult to save money and just take two kids flying to Chile. And I don't know if I'm mistaken or not, but I remember that we used to fly about 5 hours to go to Chile, and I know for sure that now you fly like 3 hours to be there. But well, anyways, we used to go to my grandpa's, and I remember that at my grandpa's we had to speak like that. It was not Spanish for me. It was like some other dialect or some other way that we had to speak when we were at my grandpa's. And I remember that so vividly because I remember coming back from a 2-month vacation in Chile. We were on the airplane, and I remember asking my mother on the airplane if we said, Mom, do we say servilleta or do we say guardanapo? And I was like very confused, you know, and a good confusion, to be honest. So you didn't know that probably, but my first second language is actually Spanish. I learned Spanish before I learned English, or before I even learned how to read and write. So I liked that naturalness that it took my mom to teach us Spanish so easily for me and for my brother. My brother also speaks Spanish and English as well, because this was a very natural, common thing in my house. It was not very common at my age, you know, I'm 46 now, so in the 80s, well, English schools already existed, but it was not very common that people were fluent in a second language. It was not something that people pursued. And there was this thing, you know, that it was very common for me, and I didn't perceive it as a talent, you know. So it was very normal, you know. It was very commonplace for me to speak a second language. For me, it was like in my mind, of course. Now I know that it was in my mind only, that all families worked like mine, because we had this sensation when we were kids that all the families are similar to ours, or think like that. And I have a story to tell you about that. I remember the first time I brought a friend over from school, and she asked me about my mother. She said, "Well, where's your mom from? She has a very thick accent in Portuguese," and I was like, "Thick accent? She has an accent?" I never realized my mom had an accent so far. It was crazy, you know. If you think about it, it was so easy for me to understand her, and it was so common for me to understand her speaking Portuguese with such a thick accent, you know, that I never realized. I never realized that she called me Marcela and not Marcela. She said P and not P. You know, it was subtle, but after that, it was like something new popped up in my head, and I started paying attention to that. Well, fast forward to the future, I became an English teacher. I love doing what I do. Thanks, Mom, for teaching me everything that I know. And it was very good that she forced me, you know, until the end, because I remember the last year I was in English school. I really didn't want to finish it. It was like the last year. It was my teen years, so, you know, my mom kind of pushed me to finish, like, you know, it's just a year. You can do it. You can do it. So it was a good thing that she did for me. But well, fast forwarded to the future, I had my first kid when I was 22. His name is Pablo. He's 23 years old now. And Pablo didn't have a brother until he was 5. This is when I had my second baby, when I had Vitor, who's now 18 years old, and both of them work with me. Pablo is my actually editor, and Vitor works helping us with social media a little bit on filmmaking, and he's also a tutor in the method. So he acts very much like an English teacher too. So he helps the students with their English practice. So both of them speak English. And I would say that Pablo probably speaks English even better than me. He consumes so much from the American culture. I mean, he's always watching films in English with subtitles in English or no subtitles. He's always crazy about all those YouTube channels with these people that I've never heard of. He's into role-playing games too, so he's always consuming this kind of thing in English because we don't have a lot of reference in Brazil, and the good references are actually in English. So I would say that his listening is amazing. You know, he listens to every little detail of things. And well, what was the technique, and how did I raise them to be bilingual since they were very little? I never put my kids through English school or binational centers like that because I didn't believe this would work for them. It was way too traditional for me, and I was actually taught English in a traditional school, and I knew for sure that if for my students it didn't work anymore to study traditionally, I wouldn't like to offer that my kids. So I offered them the opportunity to learn at home with me. Well, their father also speaks English. He's an English teacher too. I taught him English, everything he knows also. So it was easy, and I think it's easier if both parents are actually bilingual because it makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that we did, we triggered their curiosity a lot when they were kids. Sometimes we would speak about them in front of them in English. So, you know, kids, and I have to tell you this, heads up, you have to know that. It's very important that you know curiosity is a very good trigger for memory. Curiosity is amazing to make you learn, you know. So we did that on purpose. So we would comment on something with their names in the middle of it in English so that they would not understand. And we did that so many times in front of them. And it was very natural for us at home to switch languages. Sometimes we would speak Portuguese and sometimes we would speak English. And sometimes, especially when we were at a restaurant or going, for a walk in the mall, we would start speaking English, maybe about the prices, maybe about people, maybe we were gossiping a little something or gossiping something about the family, and we would do it in English. And I remember my kids were like, "Oh my God, Mom, I really want to understand." We could see their faces like, you know. And I think it was a good thing because, of course, through pregnancy, they heard a lot of English because, I was an English teacher and I was teaching all day, even when I was pregnant. So they listened to a lot of English. And I think that stayed with them in their subconscious mind for sure. I can't, I can't see it differently. Now that I know a lot about the brain and how the subconscious works, I know how this phase in their lives is very important. So if I were to give you a tip on how to raise kids bilingual, if you're pregnant already with a second kid, you can speak English with them even when they're in your womb, even when they're in the uterus, So I think that this helps my kids a lot too, because their subconscious mind was filled with words and expressions and all these things that I was teaching. And it came very easily to them. I think it's not talent, it's just that they had this worked on their mind since they were very little. And other than that, then triggering their curiosity and speaking English and switching languages a lot, because I do that a lot until now. Now I'm married again. My husband also was a student of mine, so he also speaks English. So it's very natural for me to have conversations at home where I'm speaking Portuguese and suddenly an expression comes out of my mouth in English, just because I don't remember words in Portuguese. And I know that it sounds fake or so phony when people they start speaking English and they forget Portuguese. It's not that we forget Portuguese. When we're speaking Portuguese, we speak words, we forget words in Portuguese. That's so normal, that happens. And normally what my brain does is just bring me a solution in English. So that happens a lot for bilingual people, and sometimes the solutions just come in English to my mind. And this was always very natural at home. Sometimes I did that with my mom. And I remember when I was a teenager, my mom used to do that, especially when we were out. We were like shopping or something, and she would start speaking English with me. And I remember I felt very embarrassed because, as I told you, in the 80s and in the 90s, it was not very common to see a lot of fluent people. We had people studying English, but it was not very common to see that. So people would look at us and try to, make friends, or they would just stare at us because they were curious or something. And I felt very embarrassed by that, teenagers. But my kids never felt like that. I guess that because we started doing this when they were kids, I guess I felt kind of embarrassed because my mom used to do that when I was a teenager. It was a difficult time. Teenagers are all embarrassed about things. Well, what happened later, is that we started doing this immersion programs where I would take my kids to the immersions with us. So I would tell them, listen, we're going to an immersion program this weekend. My students have to speak English all the time. You're going to help mom. And because you're going to help mom, you cannot speak Portuguese. At this point, they knew a lot of stuff, and they learned and picked up like supernaturally because it was very common for them. And I would also immerse them at home. Sometimes we would have these rituals where this weekend we're not going to speak Portuguese at all. Or we would go out for maybe a lunch somewhere special, and we would say, hey, this lunch is going to be like 100% in English, and we're just going to speak Portuguese when we go home. So creating these spaces where they would practice their English was better than just speaking bilingually all the time, speaking English all the time. Maybe, I don't know. We have all kinds of techniques and people who have raise their kids bilingually. And I have I have a friend, actually, she lives in Ireland right now. And what they did was share, the languages at home. She only speaks Portuguese to them. Her husband only speaks English. And I don't know if I would go for that, because sometimes you just want to speak your language, because there are words that, they sound better, that they're, I don't know, they sound more profound, or they hit the spot of the emotion you want to represent. In Portuguese, especially when we're angry or we want to, say something that's very affectionate, the words saudade or cafuné, they don't exist in English, for example. So there are little things like chuquinho da mãe, things like that, that we normally want to sound in Portuguese because they sound better, or they are more familiar to the kids and to us. So we did not separate these roles where my husband at the time would speak English to them, and I would speak Portuguese all the time, or vice versa. I don't know if that would work in my house. If that's what you do because you're trying to raise your kids bilingually, that's okay, but probably that would not be my go-to, because I would think I would feel more restricted. I don't know. If you're listening to this and you have an opinion on that, I want to know your opinion and what you're trying to do to raise your kid as a bilingual, and I think it's very important to enjoy the opportunity that the brain is actually very flexible from 0 to 7 years old, when you're learning everything in a very, very fast speed, and everything is natural and fun and light. Kids don't question very much at this age, so it's a very good time of life for you to start. So if I can give you a tip about how to raise kids bilingual, start very, very early. Don't put them in the school, or just, and if you're not fluent yourself and you want to influence your kids, just go, and start speaking English yourself at home, even if you know little, but you have to start introducing it to them. And especially, and I think that this is maybe the most important aspect of raising kids bilingually, is showing them how much you like the language, how much this makes sense to you, how you like maybe singing English, because I would sing in English all the time at home. You know how much I like singing. So this would make a huge difference for them too. There was something else that they would always, always and forever see me watching series and films, because I'm always into them. This is my life, something that I love doing. And normally I'm watching them in English, There was just one thing that was like forbidden, it was forbidden and frowned upon and maybe punishable. That would be watching dubbed films. This was something that I never permitted at homes, because I felt that it would, somehow affect their subconscious mind. What I can give you for a fact is that over this, I don't know, this 30 years of experience that I've had teaching English, what I have seen is that people who have in their database along their lives, okay, who have listened to a lot of English, consciously studying or subconsciously, just because they like video games, just because they like movies or series or TV shows or international music, probably these people who have listened to English a lot along their lives, they will learn much faster. And this is for a fact, I've seen that happen so many times. And a student who comes to me who only likes Brazilian music, and I'm not being like, prejudicial about that. It's not that, but people who just listen to Brazilian music or listen to dubbed films all the time, they will learn slower. I would say that comparably, if I could compare these two students, probably the one who has had more contact with English, even if it were in a subconscious way, would probably learn faster, you know. So this is also something that could help you with your own fluency. Listening to more English maybe would help you learn things, like pick up, you know, things subconsciously. Like, you're going to help your mind keep the vocabulary more easily, the sound, because there's something about the sound and the rhythm and the musicality of English that's different, you know. When we talk about intonation in Portuguese, we would go like, intonation is just up and down, up and down, up and down. And since we rely a lot on vowel sounds as well, we sound a lot the words. It's different from when you're speaking English, where you don't have to sound all the words all the time, you know. Sometimes you're just swallow some words and then they just go mumble jumbled in the middle of a sentence. So I would guess that because of that, you know, because we like sounding all the words, the musicality of English is very important that you learn. Even if it's in a subconscious kind of level, it doesn't matter, you know. So you're going to be able to pick up some certain sounds, especially the T sounds, the flap sounds that are so common in English, that we're going to see them all the time, the schwa sounds, all these sounds that are mumble jumbled in the middle of sentences, or these reductions and connections. This is all going to be picked up by your brain more easily if you're exposed to English a lot, you know. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do your listening exercises consciously. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not also saying that you're not supposed to study English. You just listen to it like while you're sleeping and you're gonna learn. This is total BS. Of course, in a subconscious level, it will help you, but learning is a process that you have to do actively. It's not something that you do passively. You know, it's not. It doesn't work just sitting down and listening to a lot of music in English and that's that. That's not what's gonna happen. But one thing that does help, that could be just light and fun, is learning the lyrics to a song, for example, and singing them. This is going to help you keep vocabulary, rhythm, connected speech. You know, I just love music. So I guess that when my kids would listen to us speaking English all the time, and they were all immersed in all these things that we did in English, that made it, you know, it easier for them to learn. And I think that it also sparked their likeness for, you know, enjoying content in English and not, you know, not negating, I would say, you know, not denying the fact that it was good to listen, you know. So I think that this helped a lot. So if you're thinking about raising kids bilingually, I would totally, for sure, advise you to go through this path, that I think it's much lighter than just designating these roles where the father just speaks a language and the mother speaks another one. I think that's tiring for the mom and dad, because, you know, sometimes you just want to have these conversations in Portuguese with your kids because maybe you're tired. Because there's one aspect that people sometimes just don't pay attention to. Sometimes your fluency in English is going to be affected by how tired you are. You know, I noticed that my pronunciation, my accent get thicker by the end of the day, because maybe that day I'm more stressed, or I'm more tired. So I'm going to tell you that it's very important that you know that, because sometimes students think that maybe I'm not fluent because today I sat down to listen to this podcast and it was very hard for me. Maybe if you try it tomorrow and you're not very tired, you're going to understand more. Or if you understand for the second time, giving your brain more chance, it will be easier for you. So the best thing if you want to raise your kids is work on your fluency. And I think that a question that maybe you guys can ask is like, what is after that? After they became fluent, how did they continue fluent? Which is a very important question. This is the same thing that I do for my English until today, because as an English teacher, and I think that maybe if you're an English teacher and you're listening to this, you're going to totally understand what I'm saying. Maybe you're going to feel that I'm talking about you. But as teachers, we don't have a lot of opportunity to practice like high level English, because we're either teaching basic English or intermediate English or advanced English, but still we're talking student levels. So it's difficult sometimes for a teacher to have an opportunity to practice their English, so it's important that you keep on practicing as a teacher yourself. So the way I do, and the way my kids, I notice that they do the same things, is like keep surrounded by English in many levels, like listening to music, continue listening to music. I love reading, and reading is one of my favorite activities to do when I'm not teaching. And I read every day, every single day I'm reading something in English. And actually I don't read actual books. I listen to audiobooks, and I love them so much. First, because they save me a lot of time. I'm like cleaning my house and I'm listening to a podcast, and I'm listening to a book, so it's easier for me. So I keep my hands busy while all this content is going to my mind, and I love that. And the other thing I do, I would say that's probably watching a lot of shows in English, sometimes with subtitles, sometimes without subtitles. I actually prefer with the subtitles, because I love digging down deep into new vocabulary if it shows up. So maybe there's this new slang going on that is on the show, especially this reality TV. There's always new stuff to learn. Now recently I've been watching Love is Blind, which I love, and there's always something new to learn, expressions that you can learn. So this is a way to keep posted, to keep yourself posted and updated with the vocabulary. What Pablo, my editor, does with his English is, I think he consumes much more English stuff than things in English than he does in Portuguese. I don't see him like reading many books in Portuguese or watching videos from Brazilian YouTubers. He's just so much more into comedy from abroad, nerdy stuff from abroad. So I guess that this is the way he keeps on going. He's also my editor, so he kind of has to watch all my stuff and like edit and learn and Google into words sometimes, because he's gonna edit them. So and for Victor, I think that teaching is something that keeps you updated all the time. So he has to prepare himself for the arenas and discuss the subjects with people, so that helps a lot. And I guess that he consumes, I think, less content than Pablo, but still he keeps his mind working in English all the time. So if I could give you a piece of advice, I would say work on your fluency first. Second, separate sometimes, create these routines, not necessarily like one role to the father, one role to the mother. I think that's too heavy a thing to do, in my opinion. I would say that maybe creating these rituals where you go out for a day and we're going to a park, and in this park we're just going to speak English, creating these immersion periods with your kids, watching things in English with them, cartoons and Disney movies, animated movies in English with them, so that they can listen to it all the time. I would say that for little kids, especially not little kids only because I'm as an adult. Sometimes I miss having little kids at home so that I can watch this kids movies because I love them. I love animations. I love Disney Pixar, for example. So I think that all these things contribute. And I'm sorry, fathers and mothers, please don't kill me as I say that, but allow your kids to play video game. Allow them. Of course, not for so many hours. You have to, but create this space where they can play video games where the story is in English and they have to connect to other people from other countries because this is going to help them so much, so much to acquire a lot of language. They're going to be curious first about the missions, for example, if they have a game where they have to develop a mission, and they're going to be hypnotized by the story, and because of the story they're going to become curious, and because they're curious they're going to learn more. So I think this is a very good tip, even though I know parents don't like their kids playing a lot of video game. It's not a lot, but let them play, and if you can do these rituals like a little bit every day or insert English every day in their lives, this will do the job. This will do all the job, everything you need to know. Yes! Muito bem, minha gente. Acho que eu dei todas as minhas dicas aqui para vocês, pelo menos as principais. Eu espero de coração que você aproveite muito, muito esse episódio. Eu fiquei tão empolgada que acho que eu vou gravar mais um episódio de podcast assim, em English para vocês. Depois eu quero saber as opiniões de vocês. Se você tá no YouTube, deixa aí um recadinho sobre esse episódio, até porque a gente vai fazendo para vocês, né? Então isso aqui é para vocês curtirem, para vocês aprofundarem, para vocês conhecerem um pouco mais a minha história, conhecerem um pouco mais das minhas conexões também. Eu acho que é importante, por isso que a gente traz bastante pessoas diversificadas para contarem um pouco das histórias delas, mas também vou fazer alguns episódios aí no meio da nossa temporada em English, porque eu acho que vai ser bacana aí. Depois me conta a sua opinião. Um beijo e nos vemos no nosso próximo episódio. See ya! Bye bye!